Fictional book? What? The fictional or real?
Yeah, it's a little novel.
It's fictional or?
Stephen King. I like Dessler. Strive for good. Yeah.
Yes, yes, it's a classic.
Class.
Okay. So here's where we're in the middle of is this guy who's pulling out bottles from the recycling bin, right? From the recycling cage. Okay. So we had seen an opinion that the whole concept that first of all you need is one person's desire, either the seller or the buyer, for the kli to be kona, and then the transaction is effectuated. So that would make it problematic for a person to pull out a bottle from the recycling bin, because it's fair to assume that when a person puts the bottle in the recycling receptacle, his objective is for the people who are going to recycle it to acquire it. It's not, his objective is not to make it hefker. His objective is, gee, I'm conscious about the environment. I'd like to recycle this. He probably also doesn't care that much if another person would take the bottle. I can't imagine that he would care. But certainly, and we talked a little bit about, someone mentioned the charity bins, the clothing bins that they have outside of supermarkets and shuls and things like that. So anyway, we were up to this paragraph. Amnam kasav hashita mekubetzes b'shem harashba shedin zeh shekelim konim humidin kinyan chatzer. That it's not because the receptacle is an extension of your hand or it's acting as your shaliach, but rather your property acquires. And your property can acquire something as long as it's a chatzer hamishtameret, as long as it's a protected area. And like we learned yesterday, what's the definition of a protected area? He says, the hagdaras chatzer hamishtameret hi d'chol sheyesh mechitzot saviv chatzer. Anytime you have walls or barriers around the property, hachatzer kona kol masha b'so chafal pisha inanu ula bimin ol. The courtyard or the place that the object is placed upon will be kona on your behalf, even if the place is not locked. People can walk in and off, like if you have a picket fence around the lawn. That's all you need. He says, and that's, the fact is, that's how a kli is kona. A receptacle is kona for me because it's bounded on all sides. It has with a barrier around it. And that's how it can be kona, even though people have access to that receptacle. And if there is an opinion that says that kinyan chatzer is only kona when you're standing in the chatzer, but if you're not standing in the chatzer, you cannot be kona through your property. And if a receptacle is kona through kinyan chatzer, how can you be standing inside a receptacle? The hakaimalon shekinyan kli kona besitma, besimta, v'harei simta ena mishtameres v'keben shlomi betocha kli heich kona bo. We know that you can be kona with a kli, as long as it's not in a public area, but it's on the sides of a public area, in an area which is so to speak, you have permission to put down an item, even if it doesn't belong to you. Let's say it's like a no man's land. That's what a simta is. A simta is sort of like the sides of a rishus harabim, where people typically put down objects temporarily to rest or to readjust their load. So there, the Gemara says you can be kona with your kli. So how could it work through kinyan chatzer if you have to be standing in the kli, right? Ela muchrachim lomar shemechitzos hakli nechshavim kemechitzos hachatzer v'chashav kechatzer hamishtameres ad kan devar. So you have to say, says the Shita, the reason it works is because the barriers or the walls of the kli themselves create that sort of protective barrier around the chatzer, and for that you don't need the owner present. Well, so therefore, in this cage that people place their bottles in, there are walls. The mesh, the cage has walls. Even though the bottles can be easily pulled out of the receptacle. Excuse me. Mikol makom hamachitzos osos sheyihe lemiskan din chatzer hamishtameres. Nonetheless, the walls create a scenario where this has the status of a protected property. And if so, it should be able to be kona. V'lochein balei hamitkan zachu b'bakbukim v'asr lokachas misham shum bakbuk. And therefore, the owner of the recycling company that sets up these cages have automatically acquired the bottles once they're placed in the receptacle, and therefore you're not allowed to take any of those bottles. So that's, according to this, where it's not working, where the kinyan of your kli is not working through the mechanism of shlichus or yad, where you have to be present and cognizant of what's going on, but rather it's working because of chatzer, because your kli is considered to be your property, and anything resting on your property that's protected can be kona even in your absence. So therefore, these bottles now belong to the recycling company. V'yatera mizu hayanira loma. I would go even further, he says. Dafilu im hayalamitkan din shel chatzer she'ena mishtameres, that even if you were going to argue that this chatzer should be judged as an unprotected chatzer, because maybe the walls are not sufficient, afilu hachi haya aser lokachas misham et habakbukim. It would still be prohibited to take the bottles out. Al pimasha hagemara omeret b'bava metzia. Im amar adam kol mitzios sheyavo lechatzer tikna li chatzeri lo amar klum kivin sha'achatzer lo mishtameret. The Gemara says that if a person has an unprotected field, let's say he's got an open lot, okay, and he says, I want that lot to be kona, anything that gets dropped or lost on my property, I want it to be kona. So the Gemara says there's no kinyan because you're not there, and the chatzer cannot be kona in your absence if it's an unprotected chatzer. Aval im yatzalo sham mitzia be'ir kagon shahanohar hitzif dagim leto chatzero kona lo. If, however, im yatzalo sham mitzia ba'ir, if let's say, or im yatzalo shem mitzia ba'ir, but let's say in the city, people would consider something that's deposited on your property as a lost item. So for example, let's say a river washes up on your property and washes fish on your property, chatzero konalo, your chatzer will be kona for you, even if your chatzer is unprotected. V'hispira hagemara sham, dekevin sheyatzalo shem metzia ba'ir, mivdol bedili in shimine. The Gemara explains that because people consider that something that is a found object, in other words, if something washes up on your property, people say, that belongs to him now because it landed on his property, and people will not try and pull it off your property. Dahainu anashim porshim milizkot ba'oto davar. People will refrain. People, ethical people will say, well, that's his. It's Bob's. It's Bob's. Landed on Bob's field. It belongs to Bob. It's not like something fell out of someone's pocket, but rather something is recognized. It's considered to be by other people to be something that you are entitled to because it came onto your property. And since people will refrain from trying to go on your property and pull off the fish, your chatzer is considered to be a protected chatzer by virtue of the fact that people will refrain from coming onto your field in order to try to get the fish. The cost of Harasham, the dinze shayach afilu b'chatzir she'ena mishtameres, the kaven shiyatzalo shem mitzia be'ir, mivdal bedile minei inshi v'nepach liodiner kechatzir hamishtameret. And the principle is that anything people will refrain from taking off of your field because they respect the fact that it's now yours, then your chatzir will be kona, even if it's an unprotected field. And what does he say in the footnote?
Wondering whether we differentiate between fish and someone's object, a gold watch or something like that, got washed up on your field. Because then.
Right,
people
right.
feel the
So
same way about
yeah,
it.
I don't know. I don't know what the Gedarim, I don't know what the parameters of this are, but it seems like it's a psychology. The psychology is that any time people recognize that it's your good luck that this thing got washed up or blown onto your property, they're therefore not going to bother to take it, then you're allowed to keep it. It's not like when someone, I guess, walks across your lot and accidentally drops stuff.
Right.
There we would say that your property is not Kona because maybe people will feel, well, since everyone's just walking on the property,
Yeah.
it's and it's not an enclosed area. Anyone who finds things there can keep it. But he says, V'im kain b'nidon didan, kevin shahamitkan hu kli v'hu omed birshut chevrat hamichzor. So he says, in our situation, you have a mitkan, which is this receptacle, which is a vessel. It is rented or in some way owned by the recycling company. The walls of this receptacle, the cage, so to speak, makes it into a protected area. And it's clear that anyone who deposits a bottle there knows that they're putting it there for a designated purpose. And they freely relinquish ownership of that bottle to the recycling company, and people generally refrain from taking bottles, then it would not be permitted to take any bottle from the recycling bin. The kol shekain lefi mashakasav moran b'shulchan aruch, the halokeach dagim mitoch mitzudato shel chavero kishuhu b'toch hayam. This is certainly true based on what the Shulchan Aruch writes, that if a person takes fish out of his friend's net, when it's, let's say a guy cast a net in the ocean or in the river, and he just left it there, and someone else comes along and pulls fish out of that guy's net, Shim ein lakli beit kibul ve'ein shem kli alav hareza asr medivrei sofrim lakachat misham et adagim. So it's only rabbinically prohibited if the net does not have the status of a kli because there's no receptacle to it. So in other words, the net is not kona on your behalf because it's not a receptacle. Aval ima mitzuda haita kli v'lokach mitocha mitzuda hareza gazlan midioraisa. But if the kli has a receptacle, it has a din of a kli, if the net rather has a din of a kli, because it's a receptacle net, so then you're a gazlan if you take fish out of that net. V'lachein. And based on that, al kol panim yeh asur lokachat mimitkan zeh midivrei sofrim. So then at least it'll be asur to take bottles, even if you want to say that it doesn't have the status of a kli. Even if you were going to argue that it doesn't have the status of the kli, you would at least be prohibited from it from an ethical standpoint, like the rabbis say, that you're not allowed to take stuff out of something that isn't even kona on behalf of a person. But if you know that a person made an effort to try and catch fish by setting up an apparatus to keep it there, then you're taking from it may not make you a gazlan deoraisa, because technically the guy wasn't kona, but you're still doing something that's still rabbinically prohibited.
It's like a lobster trap. It's got a cleave. If somebody steals it or the lobster's from it,
That's deoraisa.
rice.
Yeah. Although I wouldn't recommend getting in the lobster business.
You have to watch all the clauses.
Yeah. Anyway,
Marvin, legally, would that, see, these fishermen in Newfoundland, they put all these lobster traps, and some guy steals them or whatever, that's stealing, that absolutely.
Yeah.
Forget about the fact if it's a plea or not a plea, just helps.
yeah, that's
Well,
why
yeah,
it's,
well,
that's
yeah,
why it's
people would
usher,
think.
usher midivrei sofrim, yeah.
As people would think.
Yeah, now, so he says this is the principle. He says Tosfos in Kiddushin quotes the father of Rabbeinu Tam, the din zeh da ani hamahachbech becharara ari keshechad iniach dag meis b'mitzudaso. He says that there's a concept called ani hamahapech becharara that we've learned before when we learned, I think Hilchos Hashavas Aveda, that if there's, let's say, a poor person that's already wading his way through a dumpster or like a garbage heap. That's what they didn't have dumpsters in those days. They had piles of garbage.
Yeah.
And there's a poor person that's making his way through this pile of garbage to see if he can find anything that might be useful to him. So the rabbi said that even though he hasn't been kona anything technically, you're not permitted to start going through the same garbage heap because you go to the garbage heap that,
So
next.
he has exclusive right until he's done.
He has exclusive rights until he's done, right? And this
Even
has,
if another poor person comes. and-
yeah, even if another poor person comes, because you have to be menschlich, you have to, because otherwise the chaos will ensue and people will be fighting each other. Yeah, fighting for garbage. That's what people do. You just go to Winners, you'll see people fighting for garbage. Anyway,
Garage sales.
Shekain derech hadayagim lahasim b'mitzuda dag meit, v'al yedei zeh hadagim mitasfim sham saviv oto adag. This is the same principle would be true if a guy puts a dead fish in his net in order to act as bait to attract other fish. V'keven shezeh poris mitzudato tchila v'al yedei ma'isa she'asa zeh mitasfim sham saviv oto adag. And that's what this guy did by setting up this net with the bait. So the person who set up the original trap could say to the next guy who puts a net right in front of his net, saying, "What are you doing? It's like ani hamahapech bechurara. I was here first. You go somewhere else. Go further downstream."
Yeah.
Okay, v'imkein yesh lomar. The hachanami keven shal yedei shechevrat hamichzor hinicha mitkan miyuchad bishvil bakbukim. He says you can say the same thing. This company, this recycling company, set up a receptacle to catch bottles. It's, in other words, it's almost like setting up a net to catch fish. They set up this apparatus to encourage people to recycle. V'lachein kulam samim bakbukeyem sham. And that's what people do. They put their empty bottles in this receptacle. And therefore, taking stuff out of the guy's cage is no different from taking stuff out of the guy's net. It may not, even if you were to argue that he's not kona, but it's still a problem of ani hamahapich bechurara. That this guy is, you have to view the corporate entity as an individual who's gone to great measures to try and catch bottles, and now you're taking the bottles from him.
Mhm.
Okay?
Yeah.
Anything comparable in secular law?
Just thinking about this concept of riparian rights, which
Viparian?
riparian rights.
Riparian.
Riparian.
What's that?
It's, the rights to water that's coming down the mountain. The guy who's got it at the top, you can't be scooping, going above him and taking the water before he takes. You gotta wait, you gotta go downstream like you were suggesting.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I can think
Based on.
Yeah.
about that.
Right. So that actually might be actual gazelle. Because he has water rights. That might be actual gazelle.
He has the rights already.
Yeah.
So I guess you have to have one dumpster diver at a time,
So it seems.
right?
Right. One dumpster diver at a time, right? If a guy dives into a dumpster, has anyone ever seen any of those clips? Really, dumpster divers?
Yeah, it's a real thing.
Yeah,
They have people that do.
yeah. Yeah.
Like I know those people that drive around on a Sunday, they
Yeah.
pick up people's garbage, they, I like, I used to work for me. His whole backyard is full of junk, because he would go and he has garage sales. And he makes good money, he takes, someone's garbage is someone else's trailer
trails.
for making
Right,
money.
right. And also you can get, what is it, if you pull apart a lot of these dead appliances,
Parts.
you can get parts and you can get, metals, recycling, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Okay,
Now they have days specifically, Vaughn does, where you can put out furniture and Dafka people come and pick it up. Like, I think it's, I can't remember what it's called, but I think there's
oh, yeah,
a day where they say, put out your big furniture so that someone who wants it can come and get it.
but do they have someone driving around to collect that furniture?
No, this is members of the public are allowed to come and get it. I don't know what it's called.
Really? So there's a
Several
day that
times a
they,
year.
really?
Several times a year,
I think it's twice a year.
yeah.
Twice a year, the city allows you to put big stuff outside and people can just go and collect.
What if they don't pick it up?
And then maybe you have to bring it back in again, because I don't think the city will take it. I think it's too big for the city to take. But it's a way to get rid of your bigger stuff. And
It's really interesting.
yeah,
I think in secular also with this, the recycling stuff, I think you would be committing a tort, civil wrong by interfering with the contractual relationship between the municipality and the recycling company, because they have a deal, right? They get percentages and there's the contract stuff between the government and the recycling company. If you start taking the stuff out, somebody's losing money. So you're actually interfering wrongfully in somebody else's stuff, right? You other.
Right, it's, well, so again, the shaila is, have they legally acquired the bottles or not? So Rav Shraga feels that they've legally acquired the bottles. But he says, and even if you were going to argue that they don't, there's still a problem of ani hamahapich bechorara, of trying to enterprise off of someone else's trap that they've set up in order to attract a certain commodity. Okay. Okay. It would seem that those containers that people put out behind shuls and churches and supermarkets like NCSY, these charitable organizations that set up these things for clothing, that would also seem to be, it would also seem to be wrong on that basis to take clothing out of that dumpster. Number one, because the dumpster is Kona. But let's say the dumpster was full and a person left it on the side of the dumpster. So the argument that Rav Sharaga makes at the end of this tshuva is that it's an ani hamahapech bechorara situation. They've set up this container in order to attract people to leave their clothing. And here you are taking it from them. So that's not ethical. And it would be at least rabbinically usher because you're stealing from the charity.
So what happens if you drop something in the dumpster which you weren't supposed to? You went against your wife's wishes and dropped off one of her clothes by accident. So.
Or let's say you say it was by accident because you can't stand that piece of clothing. Okay.
So can you go get it back or the cheer NCSY they own it?
So it would seem that it depends on this deliberation. Do they own it yet or do they not own it yet? So there he was equivocating, but he was leaning towards the fact that they actually do own it, right? In which case you'd have to call NCSY, tell them I've made a terrible mistake, or at least my wife tells me that I have, and I'd like to know if I can go in and take it out, which is an interesting concept because, yeah, I guess Rabbi Black would say, yeah, I don't care, just go ahead and pull it out. That's probably what he would tell you. Okay.
it's called curbside giveaway. One person's unwanted but reusable items of someone else's treasure. During curbside giveaway days, place used items that are in good condition on your property for others to take. This initiative gives useful items a new life while keeping them out of landfills. It also encourages recycling, building a stronger community.
Okay. Right, so-
specific days.
Yeah, so that kind of campaign the city is clearly making your curbside stuff hefker, right? So the only thing that would be prohibited is if you've seen a truck pull up to someone's sofa that they've left outside, and you pull up right in front of them after they've already pulled up to this sofa and try to grab it because you're faster than them. So that would be a prohibition of ani hamahapech bechorara. The first ani came along, he was prospecting that sofa, and you went ahead and took it away from him instead.
Yeah, I don't know, there's a way you could couch it so that, sorry.
Nah,
Couch.
no. Okay, next. Beit Knesset she'asu goral v'ir'er hazoche olav. A synagogue made a lottery, and the winner lodged a complaint. So why would the winner make a complaint? Okay, anu kvutzat avrechim she'irgenu minyan lechanichei hayeshivas. Okay, so we're a group of young men. We organized a minyan for people who are, I think it's people who grew up in yeshiva. We're like a group of B'nai Torah, and we set up our own private minyan. We called it, the Rabbi Haber minyan or whatever minyan. Baruch Hashem, haminyan poel kvar kama shanim. And Baruch Hashem, the minyan's been going for a number of years. Umeachar v'hagabai ozav et hashchuna v'lo nimtza mibein havrecha mishamuchan liot gabai. That the gabai moved away, and no one else wants to be gabai of our minyan. Huchlat lasot goral mi gabai. So we decided to draw lots. Who's going to be the next gabai? Okay, it's like the guy with the short straw. You're the gabai. Yeah. Lachar hatalat hagoral zeh shezacha begoral misarev lekabel et hatafkid afal pi shehiskim lagoral mitchila. So after we took lots, and this guy got the short stick, he says, "I don't want to do it." It's just classic, right? He says, "I don't want to do it. No way. My wife won't let me." Even though he had agreed originally. And his claim is that he doesn't have to follow the rules of the lottery because there was never a kinyan made. He never obligated himself halachically. He just gave his word that, okay, we'll pull lots. Can he back out or not? All right.
What's the waiver?
What say you?
What is he doing wrong? Like, what are you punishing him? No. Over what?
Well, first of all, he's not a person who abides by his word.
Okay, but
He's definitely a jerk, right?
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, he's a jerk, right? You participated in this lottery. There's a concept of acting in good faith and acting in poor faith in halakha. Remember, we did do this concept that even without a kinyan, a person can be mechusar amana if he said, "Okay, I'm going to buy from you," and you save the product for him. He never showed up to purchase it. That's called a person who acts b'mechusar amana. You're allowed to call the guy a rasha, even though technically there was never a kinyan. He just gave his word that he was going to do something and he didn't do it. So here the guy gave, in a sense, he gave his word by saying, "Okay, I'll participate." So halachically is he within his rights to back out? Is he just the mechusar amana, or is his participation physically in the lottery of greater substance? So that's the shaila, and we'll take a look tomorrow. Have a great